Good morning, BookTube. Bill Ruttenberg here at the Ruttenberg Library. I wanted to come to you with a very, very long, overdue nonfiction November wrap-up. If you remember back to November with my Nonfiction November TBR here for the year 2021, I had set what I thought was a pretty lofty goal of reading, I believe it was 12 books. Now, that reading list, that TBR, I did get some of those knocked off. However, there was also a stack of them that I did not get knocked off. And anyway, I just wanted to share with you my final results. I finally finished this morning the final 20 pages of one of the books that was absolutely massive, and it just took me forever to read it. Really good book, but took forever. But anyway, wanted to share with you the results. And so the results of Nonfiction November would be I ended up getting 8 nonfiction books read. I also got 2 fiction books read. Maybe I shouldn't have been reading those. I don't know. It totaled out at 2,578 words, or excuse me, pages. And it averaged out to about 322 pages per book. Now, as you will see, there is not very many average-sized books in this. It is either really small or really big as far as the size of the book. So let me share with you what I got read in November. So I started off the month with Abraham Lincoln, Wisdom and Wit. And this is a teeny tiny, 61-page book, but it was full of a lot of, well, as it says, wisdom and wit from Abraham Lincoln, and you can never go wrong with that. And what's great about Abraham Lincoln's thoughts, even though they are mainly based in the Civil War and the antebellum periods, they still apply to today in many respects. And so I really enjoyed this. It was a fun read. I've seen most of these quotes in all the Lincoln books I've read. I've read a bunch, and I've seen most of them, but there were a couple new ones for me. So I really thoroughly enjoyed that. It didn't take long at all. The only reason it took as long as it did is I was just kind of picking, bit by bit while I was, 5 minutes waiting for dinner to get finished up. And so I'd open that up. So it took me a couple days, but not because of any strenuous reading. It was because of the times that I was allotting to reading it. The next book that I got read, another teeny tiny one, and this is more for young readers, but it is nonfiction. And one of the things that I've been doing at school is I've been trying to read middle grade books that I would use in class or that would be in my classroom library so that I can open up that conversation with my middle schoolers. And so this was one of the books that I read. I did not intend to at first read this, but it kind of went with some stuff that we had covered earlier in the year in school. And it's Mount St. Helens, The Big Blast. And this was a scholastic book that I thoroughly enjoyed when I was younger, and I shared with you in a video. This was originally Mrs. Jameson's book. She was one of my teachers, and thank you, Mrs. Jameson, for your donation to the Ruttenberg Library, whether you knew it or not. So please forgive me. But this was 80 pages long, but it's a wonderful book for the young readers as we study the powers of Earth. And it's got a lot of black and white photos from that 1980 natural disaster up in Washington. So enjoyed that. That was kind of a blast from the past for me. The next book that I got finished in November is John Meacham's biography on Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson, The Art of Power. And this one comes in at 759 pages. Now, absolutely loved this book. It's a big book, 759 pages, a lot of reading, but very, very well worth it. I thought that Meacham did a fabulous job with Jefferson. I will say he went a little bit soft on him in some areas that you probably shouldn't pull punches, but at the same time, this was extremely readable. it flowed very, very well. I think I shared that in another video, and I would highly recommend this. This would be really good to go along with. Maybe you find another biography that's maybe not so nice to him. And I don't want to say that Meacham skipped things in Jefferson's life. He just didn't attack him. And not necessarily do you need to attack, but you do need to address certain situations. And just the situation of slavery, I think, probably could have been handled with a little bit more in depth. But with that being said, I thought it was extremely thorough. I thought it was fast-paced, so it was easy to read. It was scholarly, but yet something that the average person could read who is not familiar with Jefferson. So good read. I would give it a 5-star. I really would. It's most likely I'm getting ready to compile my books of the year list. The end of the year review here, where I look at everything I read and what was the best. And it will be in my top 10 books. I know that. Where it'll rank in the top 10, I'm not sure yet, but it'll rank in there. The next book, and I don't have it with me. I took it back to school because it was in the language arts, my language arts teacher's collection. She handed me at the beginning of the school year a big old stack of World War II nonfiction and fiction. And this was in the pile, and it was I thought really good for middle grade kids. And it was My Survival, A Girl on Schindler's List. And it was the story of Rena Finder. And I did not write down who her co-writer was. I apologize. But Rena Finder was a Jewish gal who was basically saved by Schindler and his work crew. And she was going to be in some serious trouble in World War II Europe. It just wasn't good, but it tells her story and how the Jews were treated. And that book was absolutely a good look at what I'm going to use it for in class, is a look at the ghettos and how the Jews were treated within Poland. And yeah, just a really good read. It was only 122 pages. It was a middle grade book, but highly recommended. It was very fast read, very well put together. The next one is another small one. This was only 127 pages, but it's The Death of Lincoln, A Picture History of the Assassination by Leroy Heyman. And this was a nice little book. I picked it up for the Lincoln collection. I knew this whole story. This was nothing. I don't believe I got anything really new out of it, but it's really good for just different pictures throughout. And it's like every couple pages you've got, or every page you've got photos from the time period. And I'm not going to show you all of them, but I mean, it's just really, really good stuff. And it follows not just Lincoln in his last days, but obviously it follows John Wilkes Booth and the search for John Wilkes Booth. And it's a pretty good book for middle grade readers. I would definitely recommend this. And again, it's from Scholastic Books, so that's what it was originally meant for. But I don't remember where I found it. I don't know if I got it at Books Revisited. That's what I think, or where I think I got it, but I'm not 100% sure. But anyway, it was good. It was a nice little synopsis of the assassination. Next book I read was The First Wave, the D-Day Warriors Who Led the Way to Victory in World War II. And this was by Alex Kershaw. And it's exactly what it says. It's all about the D-Day invasion. And it takes a few of the soldiers that some of them you've probably heard of. They're pretty typical, but there's also some of them you haven't heard of, and it tells their personal story, and it does it from a couple of different points of view, and mainly from the British and the American points of view during the invasion, but it also looks at the Canadians who were also involved. It looks at the Germans and what they were doing, but it follows the Allied powers and just wonderful account. And when I say it follows the Germans, obviously they were not allied, but it shows like the defenses that they set up and why and how they did things, and how the Americans and the British and the Canadians really disrupted that whole process, and how they were able to come to victory on D-Day. And I think one of the best parts of this book, or one of the most interesting, maybe that's the word I should use, one of the most interesting parts of this book was the very end of the book, when it started talking about what happened to the soldiers who survived. Because to me, it was very sad, because a lot of them suffered from PTSD, and various issues came out of that. And, it talks about suicide of some soldiers who couldn't deal with stuff, talks about renegade behaviors of other soldiers. And I found that the most interesting part of the book. The whole thing is very fast flowing. If you're looking for a quick read on D-Day, that's I'm not going to say it's like a college scholarly book, college level scholarly book. It's meant for the mainstream public, but it is very well researched. I don't want to take away from that, but it is the excuse me, the language that he uses in the text that he puts down is very readable, very fast flowing. Very much enjoyed that book. I'm definitely going to recommend Kershaw to other people. And as a matter of fact, on one of my book hauls I've shown you, I found another Kershaw book, the Bedford Boys, I believe, that I am going to read by him, and I'm real excited about that. So the next book that I read is The Battle of Gettysburg by Frank Haskell, and it's a memoir of Frank Haskell. It's edited by Bruce Catton, and this was wonderful. I don't know that I would recommend it to an average reader who doesn't know a whole lot about Gettysburg. This is probably more for somebody who's got more experience in reading or in experience and knowledge with Gettysburg and what happened on those 3 days. But it's an excellent account. You can see I tabbed it in several different places. The way that he describes, Frank Haskell, the way that he describes some of these battlefield moments, it makes you feel like you are right there in the moment. And he does a tremendous job of talking about, the high water mark on day 3 of Gettysburg, standing at the where the rock wall was, and watching the Confederates charge across the open grounds, and just all of the stuff that went with that. And he talks about, when the shell fire was coming in. There's one moment where he's talking about the guy got down and hid, and shell blew up, and it didn't hurt him. But then the next guy, who looked like he was pretty well hidden, got nailed. And so it's just the chances that these soldiers were taking. I don't know. It was very powerful, very powerful. Now, the reason I would not recommend it to an average reader is because he also gets into a lot of detail on the different regiments, the different. Now I'm going blank on what you call the different groups of men that where the divisions, the regiments, and all that. He goes into great detail on where they're placed on the battlefield, and you get lost pretty quick unless you are very, very knowledgeable with Gettysburg and who is actually there, what different groups of men. For me, I am not real great at memorizing all of the different divisions and corps and the regiments and all that. I'm not very good at that. So that part, it was kind of a blur for me. I kind of went through that fairly quickly when I was reading, but there were enough times, like I said, you can see how many times I tabbed it, where he gave just a absolutely powerful description of what being on that battlefield was like. And I thought that was absolutely wonderful. And, this is one of the best accounts of what it was like in that battle. Now, are there some things that can be argued with Haskell's memoir? Yes. And Bruce Catton does a wonderful job of that. And he shows where Haskell might have gotten, a few things wrong when he was looking back, because he wrote this pretty quickly after the battle. It was just a couple of weeks after, and he started putting his account down. And so, he might have taken some guesses on how many men were in a certain area, and he was off by, a few numbers. And Canton does a real good job of explaining if he was wrong in some area, or if Haskell's account had some issues with it where people didn't agree with him, people that were actually involved in the battle. And he shows where you can find those differing arguments. And so anyway, great book. Glad I read it. And then the last one for Nonfiction November that I just finished, the last 20 pages of this morning, is, and I had been actually reading on it since October 1st, is Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom by David Blight, the winner of the Pulitzer Prize. When did it win the prize? Was it 2019? I think the book came out in 2018, and I think it won it that next year. I could be wrong on that. Please don't quote me on that. But if I'm right, go ahead and quote me. But anyway, excellent book. I am so becoming engrossed in Frederick Douglass, and I've read a ton of stuff lately in the last few months on, slavery and the Civil War and the fight to end slavery. And I am so glad that I read this. This will be on my top 10 books of the year. It'll rank probably pretty high. I really enjoyed this. Before this book, the only thing that I had read that was solely on Douglass, and I've got a few books in the collection, I just haven't read them yet. But the only book that I'd read was his very first autobiography, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass. I read that every year with my students so they can get a feel for what slavery was like from the eyes of somebody who went through that. And of course, we talk about escaped slaves and the fugitive slave law and all that. So his life plays in really well with what we're talking about in class. And so that was the only book I had read. But he had actually wrote 2 other autobiographies later in life. The second one is it catches up the time period. At the time he wrote it, it catches up from the beginning of his life all the way up to that point. And so he rewrites that original story basically, and he gives a whole lot more detail and stuff. And he he changes the wording of some things, and they talk about that, and Blight talks about that in this book. He does a really good job of explaining that. And then the third one, I think it's Life and Times, I think is what the name of it was. But the third autobiography, which is kind of a big old thick book, he goes back and rewrites his story again, and things start to soften up. You start to see his age is coming out, where he's not as not that he's not fighting for the cause, but he's softened up a little bit, and so he just has a different lens in his glasses as he looks back. And so anyway, this was a wonderful account. I think Blight did a great job. I know Lukács put it in his top 5 nonfiction books that he read in the year, and I buddy read with him and Patrice Jones and Peg. We all buddy read this, and that was a wonderful experience. Really glad I did that. But I finally got it done. It's 892 pages. It is a big book. And it's a little slower read because it's more, it's just more dense than some of these other books. And so I really enjoyed it. Highly recommend it for anybody who is studying the Civil War, the antebellum period, slavery, Frederick Douglass, and it gives a wonderful account of the context of everything. So it's not just his life. It tells about his family, all of his kids and grandkids, tells about life on the plantation as a freedman, as he moves on later in life, he ends up getting some government jobs, becomes the first African American to hold some of these positions, and of course it goes on the road with him as he's giving all of his speeches. This man, I cannot explain how much respect I have for him, not just for what he went through and what he was able to become, but, you know, as a teacher. We talked about this in our Voxer chat quite a bit. As a teacher, you know, you get up in front of the class and you do a lot of talking. There's days where you do a lot of talking. Some days you don't, but there are days where you do a lot of talking, and especially early in the school year, and you start to lose your voice. And, you know, and I also coach on top of that. I coach football, and, you know, I'm kind of a high octane coach sometimes when I'm out on the practice field with them, you know, and I get to hooting and hollering, and I know what it's like to lose my voice. And the amount of speeches that he did, and to be able to just continue on the abolitionist speech road, if you want to call it that, I'm amazed that he did not get sick, that he did not wear down more than he did, and just that he didn't lose his voice more than he did. I think it's amazing. I mean, the man was giving 2 and 3 hour speeches, and that's just impressive. So anyway, I've rambled on enough about that one. That is a great book. You'll probably hear me talking about that again when I get my top 10 list done. I'll post that video here pretty soon. So also, I forgot to mention at the very beginning of the video, I will put a link to Olive's channel, who puts together the Nonfiction November. She always does a wonderful job, and she gives four themes that you are to read under. You don't have to. The idea is just to read more nonfiction, which is primarily what I read. As I said, 8 of the 10 books I read in November were nonfiction, so that's pretty normal for me. But she does a wonderful job putting this little reading event together every November, and I have been very blessed to join this the last couple of years. So thank you, Olive. I'll leave a link to her channel down below. And anyway, I got to go get to looking at that list so I can get my video ready for top 10 books of the year. I'm still rambling. I told you I didn't get all the books read because my list changed. So here are the remaining books, and I am going to try to read these in the next week and a half while I'm on Christmas break, or I'm going to see how much I can get read. And Eisenhower in Berlin, 1945, by Stephen Ambrose. Halleck, Lincoln's Chief of Staff, by Stephen Ambrose. Crisis of Empire, Great Britain and the American Colonies, 1754 to 1783, by I.R. Christie. James McPherson's book, For Cause and Comrades, Why Men Fought in the Civil War. Abraham Lincoln, Slavery in the Civil War, Selected Writings and Speeches. I'm going to dip in and out of that one. And then James McPherson's Crossroads of Freedom, Antietam. And so I look forward to, over the next week and a half, seeing how many of these I can get read. So anyway, those were supposed to be on the Nonfiction in November, but that didn't happen. But that's okay. So anyway, I need to be quiet. I need to wrap up. Thank you for watching. Thank you so much. Thank you to all the new subscribers out there. I really appreciate it. And yeah, BookTube, happy reading.